All right, Rick, you and I had the great pleasure of being on a text thread with our buddy Pete Prisco on Saturday, who was calling you out for not knowing football nearly as well as he did as we were watching the Kansas State TCU game. And if you want, we can start there. If you want to start with, you mentioned Felix Anudike Uzama as someone you'd like to talk about, the edge rusher for Kansas City State, number 91. I think everyone that we're going to talk about probably helped themselves. I'm interested in what you think about Anudike Uzama because he's only 20. He's incredibly strong. He's not particularly twitchy or bendy, I thought, but he has a high.
Whoa,
here we go. Here we go. All right, what we got?
Bendy. Did you see the guy come off the edge and dip and make a sack in that game?
The quarterback didn't step up, though.
Okay, well, if you go through the season and you watch this guy come off the edge, this guy has first step quickness.
Okay.
He has enough bend. He is like, I don't want to call him, he's a little bit out of control. So the term that I would kind of describe him as is maybe a blind dog in a butcher shop every once in a while when you see the style he plays. But he's long, he's athletic, he can run. He plays 1,000 miles an hour, stuff that you can't teach. What you can teach is some of the technical issues that he has. But when I watched him in the bowl or in this past game against the run, he plays stout at the point. He can play with leverage and strength. He's able to get off blocks. He's able to locate the ball carrier. He's a solid tackler, and even had a couple quarterback pressures when they slid him inside and ran in on some games. So I think this kid, defensive line coaches in the NFL, now people may not recognize his name at this point, but this is going to be a riser through this draft process, and this kid has a chance to be a pretty good NFL defensive end.
I agree with all that.
No, he's not stiff.
No, I don't think he's stiff, but I don't think he's oily hipped. Is that something that scouts say?
No. That's something someone in the media would say that no one would understand what the heck you're talking about.
There you go. But
Debo might say that. Debo, does he have oily hips?
That's
I never heard that.
Debo says that at the club. But you make a good point. Like he faced a lot of double teams in that game and throughout the season, and he's very stout against double teams. I like him, and I think he's going to get better because he's young. I don't love him. And when you say you like someone, that doesn't necessarily mean you're taking him top 15 either. And that's something that I think folks in the media and fans get confused about. You can like a guy that ends up going on day 2 at some point. Although I would imagine the fact that he's young makes you feel even better about his prospects down the road.
Yeah, and I'm not creating a monster out of this guy, and right. I don't want to put this, but some of the same traits, and especially if he's going to run 4.6 or better when he gets timed in this pre-draft process and goes through these workouts, which I think he's going to be able to, there's a little bit of Danielle Hunter in this kid as well.
Oh, Danielle's a little longer though, right?
He may be a little longer, but similar motor, similar way that they move, plays with the energy. And then Coach Patterson, Dre Patterson, who was our defensive line coach, who I think is one of the best in the NFL that I've ever been around, took a guy that was a mold of clay and shaped him into a pretty good pass rusher. And I think a lot of defensive line coaches are going to be really licking their chops to get a hold of this kid and coach him up.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we talked about last week with Brian Brzee, the interior defensive lineman at Clemson, who you can't find guys that look like that, even though he's not necessarily flashing. And I think you're right. Anudike Uzama has actually flashed this year. And going back to last year, Drake Jackson, the name I mentioned last week, who didn't set the world on fire at USC, but I had several scouts tell me, you look at that body, and NFL defensive coach like, well, we can work with that. And he's actually played pretty well so far this year. All right, let's go to another game. I don't want to talk about Julius Brents just yet. We'll talk about him later.
Oh, okay. All right. There's a pet cat that I'd like to talk about a little bit. But go ahead.
Let's talk about Julius Brents, this cornerback number 23. He's 6'3" and maybe taller. I thought he had a pretty good game against Quentin Johnston, and you got on me about saying tight-hipped Anudike Uzama. You're not a fan, but before you go, let me just say
I'm not saying I'm not a fan. I'm sitting here looking through a couple of my notes, but as long as he doesn't have to play against Quentin Johnston in the NFL, he'll be fine.
He only lost Quentin Johnson on one play. Quentin Johnson then made that acrobatic contested catch early in the game, and he lost him on a scramble drill once. But I think his future might be.
Yeah, but are you forgetting all the DPIs that he had? The dropped interception. He made one interception
He
on
did
a
drop
really poorly thrown ball that was underthrown. But you watch this game, and then you watch the game where Quentin Johnson just blew past him in the regular season game when they matched up against each other. Now, I think this kid's going to be intriguing because he's 6'4". He's got big man movement skills, what I describe, but he's going to be effective if you're going to play him in press. I think he's going to run well enough. Just don't ask him to play off in mirror and coverage, because that's where his feet kind of get tangled up, and he's a little I don't want to call him whatever you referred to, oily hip. I think he's a little gangly. Yeah. In his movements. But it was fun. It was. That was one of the matchups that I was excited to see, because I watched it in the regular season, and it was a fun matchup to watch again in the Big 12 championship game.
So trying to project him going forward, and I put this in my notes. I wondered, is this a situation where he's not going to, he's not going to be able to hang with smaller, quicker receivers who happen to be on the outside or whatever, and he plays primarily outside. Is this something where you might think about finding a hybrid role for him, or maybe put him in safety, or maybe having him closer to the box? Because he'll hit you in the run game. Look, he's not afraid to tackle.
Well, yeah. I mean, hit's a relative. I mean, it's your hit and my hit may mean two different things. So
I liked him against the run. You didn't like him against the run.
That's why scouting is so subjective. I mean, you may think this guy is a hitter, and I was like, this guy wouldn't hit himself out of a paper bag.
You think so?
No, I think this guy is willing enough. But for a 6'4" guy, the one thing that I would say I would have issues with if you do move him to safety is when he has to break down in space versus a running back. God forbid he has to go against Gibbs against Alabama in open air.
Right.
Okay. He's going to really struggle to what I refer to as come to balance in open field. So he's just going to have to take his shot and try to run through the guy, because as soon as he starts to gather, those running backs at this level are going to run right around him.
So Debo points out on our little chat here that Israel Mukuama out of South Carolina a few years ago is currently the tallest cornerback in the league. He played alongside J.C. Horn. I think he was a day 3 pick for the Cowboys. I don't think he's as good as Julius Brents in terms of NFL projectability. Do you have an idea? Would you be interested in a player like Brents? I thought he might be like a late day 2, early day 3 guy. Is that too rich for you?
No, I think if he runs well enough at that size, someone's going to, I don't want to call overdraft him, but say, hey, he performs at the combine, and he goes through all the pre-draft workouts. Someone's going to fall in love with him, because it's rare to find a corner with that type of size to match up with big receivers that he's going to have to face. He's just going to have to get a little better, making plays on balls in air. Finding the ball, like he missed the ball. It was a great throw and catch, though, in that championship game. But even when he's looking for the ball, there were 2 DPIs in this past game, if I'm not mistaken, that he's running into the receiver, not trying to find the ball in the air. Because one of the critical parts about being a corner when you're evaluating corners, and there is a little corner in here that's my favorite football player that we'll talk about, hopefully. But you have to be able to find the ball and make plays on balls in air, because you can be in position, but if you can't find the ball, it's a completion, and then what good are you?
Exactly. All right, let's talk about that corner now. I'm assuming we're going to Utah?
Yeah. Oh, geez. I didn't know that.
Let's go to Utah. Talk about Clark Phillips III. Utah played USC and the Jordan Addisons. And Jordan finished with 5 catches, 65 yards. You and I both are big Jordan Addison fans. He's undersized.
Did you give me a comparison on Jordan Addison? I think I threw my Devontae Smith out there, but you didn't seem
I gave
like
you
you were...
one last week. Oh, I said Josh Downs. You got angry because they don't play the same position.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I meant the same size. They're similar height and weight.
No, wrong comparison.
You think, but you mentioned that Jordan's actually it's going to be smaller than Josh Downs. I'll get back on the Jordan Addison comparison. But let's talk about Clark Phillips, because I thought he had a pretty good game.
Yeah, he is one of the most competitive little corners that I've seen in college football. Now, he's going to get knocked on because of his size, but you talk about a guy that can mirror. in coverage, a guy that is quick twitched out of his transition as he works in his pedal and reacts to routes back underneath. You talk about a kid that will come up and hit you. I mean, he made a great play when Addison was running a slant route. He cut right into that slant route and had a PBU in the end zone. This kid's a very good football player. Some people may consider him as a nick only just because he lacks the ideal size. But I think this kid, if he was in your guy, Julius Brent's body, this guy would be a top 5 pick because I think he's one of the most complete football players that I've seen on the tape this year at the corner position. He's just small.
So I'm going to throw a comp out here and feel free to dunk on me. Asante Samuel Jr. was small coming out of Florida State.
Oh, my God. Asante Samuel Jr. can't run like this kid. That was what Asante Samuel Jr.'s issue was. And
but
he's
he was
more
small.
of a zone corner. Huh?
Small, though.
Yeah, okay, but when you're making your comparisons, just note to self, if you want to take a little note there, it's not just size. Actually look at the tape and see if they have the same type of quickness, the same type of speed. Will they come up and hit the same way? There's other things, just, let's put him in a little small category.
Well, I was trying to think off the top of my head, someone who was small coming out and who's been okay in the NFL. By the way, is this how you talk to the scouts in meetings? Like you just went off on them if they said something stupid?
No, just you.
Fair enough. I love it. All right. I actually like Clark Phillips as well. I think I liked him as like a day 2 guy, early day 2 guy. And as you mentioned, if he were 6'1", we wouldn't even be talking about any of the size issues because I think he is a really good football player. No thoughts?
Yeah, you're just regurgitating everything I just said. You need to come up with your own thoughts.
Early day 2?
You don't like it. Yeah, Asante Samuel Jr., come on.
Jesus. You ever seen a grown man cry, Rick?
Yeah, Pete, on Sundays when I'm watching games with him.
Okay, let's go to the other side. You talk about Clark and the game he played. Anything changed about Jordan Addison? Because Jordan Addison has been dominant for much of this season for USC after transferring from Pitt. He's still the same guy to me. I mean, he can't do everything. Caleb Williams is going to be special for sure. But I thought nothing changed with me in terms of how I felt about Jordan Addison.
No, he can play. He can play inside as a slot. I think he's fast enough and long enough to play outside because of his quickness, and I think he has unique speed. I think he's going to run very well. And just like we're seeing this skinny guy up in Philadelphia who went in the first round, Smith, Devontae Smith. I think you're going to see the same type of results with Jordan Addison.
By the way, little birdie just told me that Asante ran a 4.49. So in Rick's role, that's slow. I'm making a note of that too, Rick.
Who ran a 4.49?
Asante Samuel Jr.
Yeah, that's a slow 40 for a corner. Small corner.
Get out of here. All right, let's talk about a big corner. We talked about Julius Brents. Let's talk about the corner for Georgia, who currently is a lot of folks in the media. Their cornerback one, Keely Ringo, and he's been going among the first cornerbacks off the board when I do these mock drafts. I had him going 6th, which seems sort of high for a cornerback. Catch your breath there, to the Eagles in my most recent mock draft. So let's talk about Keely Ringo in the battle. And you actually tweeted this to Pete and I with Kayshon Boutte, who finally showed up. He had a good game. So let's talk about those two players. What are your thoughts after the conference championship game in which Georgia, rolled LSU?
Yeah, Ringo's a very good football player, and he may be the most complete corner. I think, Ryan, if it was you I was talking to, I'm not sure, that we were trying to make some comparisons because he's almost 6'2". He's going to probably be 200 plus pounds. I think he runs well enough. He had 3 probably bad plays in that championship game. Watching him, he had a PBU, but he also had a defensive pass interference. He can mirror man coverage, but when he is off and those receivers get on top of him, he has a tendency to get back on his heels, and then he is kind of slow to transition. Or that's where you see the initial separation from the receiver in him when he's playing man coverage. But he's long, he's athletic, he can run. I think he tackles well enough. He had a missed open field tackle in the LSU game. We made some comparisons of a Xavier Rhodes type. I think this guy may be a little bit smoother as an athlete, but I don't think he is as physical as Xavier Rhodes was when Xavier came out.
Right. Yep. I remember you saying that. So let me ask you this. so someone like Keely Ringo, your team in the top 10 that needs a cornerback pretty bad, and you say you need a couple other positions as well. Are you comfortable taking a cornerback like Keely Ringo in the top 10, or are you focused on other things and maybe circle back around given the depth in this class?
Yeah, I think it's what the depth of the position is. You're always going to look at that. If we definitely need a corner and we don't take a swing at one here, are we able to come back around on Friday and get another corner that we like? But if this is your top corner and this is a guy you think is separated himself from every other corner in this draft, which I don't think he has, because I honestly think Joey Porter's right up there with him on when you compare the two. I think they will travel together through this process, and they'll be jockeying for position on probably which corner is going to go first in the draft. But if you need a corner, just because of his size and his athleticism, that he'll definitely be in conversation.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and you can answer it however you like. So we talked about these two big corners, Joey Porter Jr. And Keely Ringo. And let's go back a few years to Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn. Are the kids in this class similar to those two, or are those two better players?
I think those two may have a little better ball skills. I think they were more productive with the ball in the air. I'm anxious to see what Ringo actually runs, because a couple of times getting out of his turn, he got stretched down the field and he was in catch-up mode. Now, he's a long strider, so it's going to take him some time, but I think the longer the play is extended, then you can see his speed kind of kick in. But I'm anxious to see what these guys run, because I thought those, the two guys that you just mentioned were ready-made corners to come in and start day one. I think these guys will be that. I just want to kind of hold off right now till I see what they actually end up running.
And last year, two other corners that went high in the draft, Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley.
Sauce was in a whole different category. Now, you talk about a 6'2", 6'3" corner. If you're trying to compare him to your guy Brent's from then maybe we ought to talk about the NBA mock draft, because there is no comparison. Sauce was he was in a different universe from everybody else watching him last year.
And yet Derek Stingley went first. I remember finding out a few days before the draft that the Texans really loved Derek Stingley, and I love Derek Stingley too, but it felt like Sauce Gardner, when you saw him walking through the Indianapolis Convention Center at the Combine, he was so long, he looked like he was an undersized defensive end, like some of those 230 defensive ends you see walking around these days. But is he one of the most freakishly athletic?
Yeah. I went there. I had an opportunity to see him play live, and when I saw him, when I first went out there and him warming up, and you said you mentioned it, the frame is just unique. And then all of a sudden you see this guy, and a lot of times when scouts go to these games, and they go to college games, and I can watch the tape, but I really get a sense and a feel for a guy when you actually see him and see him moving in pregame warmups. And Sauce, for a kid that was 6'2", 6'3", whatever his height ended up being, I've never seen a guy that tall that can drop his weight, drop his hips, and get into and out of his transition. And that was just watching him in pregame. So I knew that there was something special about this kid. And you just sitting there and watching this guy, and there's just something, an aura, or there's a sense about the kid that that he knows he's the man.
So you're standing there with all the people you've known throughout the league for years, and can you get a sense that everyone's feeling the exact same thing you are, but you don't want to look at them because you don't want to give anything away?
No, I told him this is the biggest stiff I've ever seen play corner. Good luck if you take him.
You probably did say that. All right, let's talk about the other side of the field. Kayshon Boutte, who had 6 catches for 107 yards, had a nice touchdown on a little yak play there. And you've said it before, like it's been hard to get a gauge on who he is because he doesn't have Joe Burrow throwing him the ball at LSU. The quarterback situation was sort of in flux, and Jane Daniels got better as the season went on, had an ankle injury in this game. But what'd you see from him that perhaps you didn't see earlier in the year?
I seen a little bit better. The one thing that really stuck out was on that run is that you saw his athleticism and his ability to pull away from defenders, and he's pulling away from some pretty fast dudes over on the Bulldog side. And every time you watch offense, especially in the SEC, most teams and most scouts, the first tape they're going to put on is how did they do against Georgia? Because Georgia has probably the most dominant defense over the past couple of years in college football. So you're going to say this is going to be the closest comparison we can make to potentially an NFL defense because of all the dudes that they have on the defensive side of the ball. What I don't like about him is I don't think he is very competitive when the ball is not in his hands. A few times he has some bobbles because he prefers to catch in tight, but then you watch another play and he sit there and just snatch the ball, and he has natural snatch and pluck hands and just plucks the ball right out of the air. I went back and watched the 21 tape. I think he only played in 6 games, and you saw him play outside. You saw him play inside. Here this year, the only thing you did was see him play in the slot, and it was a totally different system. He does a lot of these what we call spacing routes, where they go out 5 yards and just kind of find spacing between the zones. Sometimes he caught the ball. There's a couple bobbles. He just did not look like he was totally into it every snap. Where when you watch Justin Jefferson, you watch Jamar Chase, those guys were just going, and playing every down. I had issues. I didn't think this kid was playing hard every down. And whether he was disgruntled because he wasn't getting a lot of targets, I don't know. But those are the things that if I was going to interview him at the combine or interview him in this pre-draft process, I would have find out, why are you don't look as competitive when the ball is not in your hands? Why aren't you screaming off the line of scrimmage every time you run routes? You have the ability to do that, yet you don't show it down in and down out.
And sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but sometimes that's how the offense is. Like sometimes they tell the receivers, if you're not targeted, just, half-ass it out there. And have you gotten that response as well before?
Yeah, no, that was like when we watched kids from Baylor.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to run vertical routes all the time, well, if it's going to the right and you're the left outside guy, take the play off because you just ran 52 40-yard dashes in the game. Right. So sometimes with these spread offenses, coaches will tell that's, and we talk to the coaches about that. We talk to the players about that. And the coaches will tell them, okay, we have this guy running and we're going so fast and trying to get so many plays in that when they do, that's the chance they can get to catch their breath. This guy's playing in the slot, so that's different. And he's playing, he's doing a lot of underneath type routes. And that's where I had an issue with him, is because he's not humming off the ball, even if he's running a 5 to 10 yard route.
Okay, and a guy who never takes a playoff, and he's, I think it's his 6th year, started at Buffalo, transferred to Iowa, left Iowa last year, came to Purdue, and has been, the offense at Purdue, and that's my guy, Charlie Jones.
Athleticism. Your guy, I mean, you've been talking about him since September. I thought this guy was a top overall pick in the draft, the way you talk about this kid.
The athleticism isn't there. The want-to is there. I think he has great hands. He makes a ton of contested catches, and that's in part because he struggles to get open, but I think
because he can't run.
But is there a place for him on Rick Spielman's team?
Yeah, because he's a really good football player. Who would you compare him to? I'm kind of curious if you
I think he's not as athletic as Hunter Renfrow. Hunter played different position. Don't start with me. Hunter played mostly inside, but Charlie plays outside, and Charlie plays some inside too. But he's taller than Hunter, and I don't know a player who's lacks that foot speed but does those things well. I don't know. It's hard to figure out a guy who might fit that bill.
Well, this kid reminded me a little bit of a kid we took in the later rounds from Colorado State a few years ago. Unfortunately, he blew out his ACL. There's a kid from Colorado State named BC Johnson who couldn't run, but he could run okay. But he had just so natural at route running. I mean, there wasn't any wasted motion. He can separate because of his savvy, not because of his natural physical skills. He caught everything. He had a couple of games when BC played for us before he got hurt that he really was productive for us. But I think his ceiling is just so low. I think what you see is what you're going to get with this kid. But this kid is a good football player, and he's probably going to find himself on an NFL roster.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was talking to a scout about him, and the question was, can he play special teams? Because if you're going to be a number 4 wide receiver, which is what he's going to be, you have to be able to do more. He returns kicks and punts, but I mean, in terms of being on the coverage, yes, and being on the coverage teams, can you do that? Because I don't think you want him back there returning kicks and punts by the shaking of your head sideways. And if you can't do that, and I'm sure these are the conversations you guys have numerous times leading up to the draft, then where does he fit? Because you can't just be number 4 receiver and not contribute at all to special teams. And maybe he's a number 3 best case scenario in 3 or 4 years or something. But, based on the physical attributes, it's just not there. But you love the way that he plays the game. You love his ability to catch the football. But if he's not getting open in college in the Big Ten, he ain't getting open in the NFL. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you love the way, like you just said, the way the kid competes. And on the biggest national stage that Purdue played on this year, he actually jumped out on the tape when you watched it.